So, Amazon's The Rings of Power is another large-scale production. It's supposed to be about the Lord of the Rings and the Middle-earth universe and all that fun stuff. Yeah, a lot of Middle-earth fans and Tolkien fans, etc., we're not happy. We're not liking it. We're not digging this. But why not, though? Why not just give it a chance? Why not just go easy on it and say, who cares if all the details aren't quite the way you want it? Why can't we just enjoy it and go along for the ride? What's the big deal? I mean, I'm a huge fan of fantasy. Huge fan of Lord of the Rings or any fantasy in general. I mean, give me any story about, elves or wizards and dragons and swords and magic or whatever. It doesn't matter. Just throw it at me. I'm down for that kind of thing. And I don't even need high quality. I don't need big budget. I've enjoyed B films and just, who cares? Let's just have some fun. That's what it's all about, right? It's fantasy, for crying out loud. Yet there's still something that is just not right about this. Now, let's start with the Tolkien side of things. He has this massive legendarium, and that's the first problem. It's a legendarium. They don't say that about Marvel or DC. Okay, they didn't really say that about Star Wars, well, maybe a little bit. Tolkien and his writings were not just, they were never an open canon where you just rewrite it and think around with it as you see fit. The author was explicit. He did not like the idea of Hollywood adaptations. He hated allegory and specifically hated the way they, movie makers would just play fast and loose and just reckless with the content of the story, just for none of this. There's no ambiguity. Tolkien was very public in his statements. There's no way you can say you respect Tolkien and then like any adaptation is going to just screw up his lore. Hell, even the Jackson films, which are very popular, Christopher Tolkien, who had spent his life protecting his father's legacy, was not a fan of the Jackson films. So something that even twists the lore even further, you can't say we're supposed to like that. At least you can't say Tolkien would have. I'm sorry, there's not ambiguity about that. So out of respect for Tolkien, you can't say that it's fine when they just completely scramble the lore he wrote and then try to use his name on it. That's the first problem. Is like, why not just make your own fantasy? Why they have to? Like I said, I like fantasy. I like fantasy of all kinds. They didn't need to use the name Lord of the Rings. Spend that massive budget of theirs on just some anything. Make a new show. If they claim to have such writing skill, they can write the caliber of Tolkien, then why do they need his name for? Just make a new show, and I would have loved it. I would have been down for that. A lot of people would have loved it. They were craving new stuff, but they don't seem to produce that anymore. And well, that comes to the next problem: the money. Yeah, they did have a huge budget for this, and didn't have a huge budget because someone was taking a risk on this new artistic idea. That's what happened when Jackson made his films. It was a risk. No one had ever done a large-scale adaptation of Lord of the Rings before, so was it going to work? Would it be accepted? But that's not what happened with Rings of Power. What happened with Rings of Power was a corporate billionaire just used his money to buy out the rights to the franchise. And again, the idea of referring to it as a franchise just cringeworthy. Some guy with lots of money buys the rights and then just produces a show. Yeah, I believe he was famously quoted as saying, "Bring me Game of Thrones." The guy just wants a show. He's using his money to buy a property that's got clout behind it and then making his own show out of it. That's it. This isn't a passion project. This is like a financial investment at best. So you can't buy love. I don't care how much money you got. I don't care how much you paid to get the rights to illegally use the name Lord of the Rings. You can't buy love. You cannot buy love. You cannot buy respect. You cannot buy clout. I owe them nothing. I have no obligation to, well, they're making the film, so you're supposed to know. I spent my life, literally, grew up reading Lord of the Rings and Tolkien's lore. I don't owe that passion to Amazon. I don't. Not an ounce of it. So I don't care how much money they spend. I have no obligation to consider anything they do as canon. If they want my love, they want my respect, if they want all the clout that comes with Tolkien's name, they have to earn it. They have to work for it. They have to have something to back it up with, not just, well, we spent money and produced a show, so now here it is. You just have to like it. No, I don't. I don't have to do anything. And that takes us to the next step here. It's the propaganda. I'm sorry, they've made no mystery about the political side of this whole thing. They have publicly made statements constantly about the racial stuff or this, that, and the other thing. And so, like, they, in their minds, they don't see this as they love Tolkien or they love The Lord of the Rings and they want to make a great film. No, that's not how they say it. They, through their own mouths, they see this as a social engineering project. You know, the necessary redress of balance. As if there was, something wrong with Tolkien's work and something wrong and insidious about the influence his work has had on our world, and they have to fix it now. And that's just what it is. They want to use their money to buy the influence, the cultural influence that Tolkien has had, and they just want that. They want that influence. And they're doing it with money and then with propaganda, declaring that basically saying, one moment they say Tolkien is racist and his work is inherently bad, and if you like his work, you're bad. But then they defend themselves saying, no, Tolkien's work was always multicultural, and if you don't like what we're doing, then you're a bad person. But if you thought Tolkien's work was always multicultural, then why are you blatantly changing it, saying that you're fixing it now? It's just, no, that they are social engineers, they're racist, they're just narcissists, and they think they can just bully their way in, and people are supposed to love what they do because they have money and they use Tolkien's name. If you don't like it, you're a bad person. I don't owe them anything, and I don't buy any of their nonsense rhetoric. I just don't. And, okay, so what about all the, what if we put the lore differences aside and the background, the behind the scenes stuff aside, the politics aside? Okay, never mind all that. Okay, we don't want. That's such a headache to talk about anyway. It's a show being produced. It's got everything I said I liked in it, right? It's got elves. It's got magic and swords and fantasy land. What can we just enjoy it for its own sake? Can we just watch this show and say, hey, it's a fun show? Let's just stop all the other nonsense. Well, that's the problem. It's actually kind of a trash show. I mean, terrible writing. I mean, dialogue is a headache. And messaging that's just, God, one moment, like, really heavy-handed. Like, how many times I have to remind you that girls are always right, and don't you ever question me, all the guys are all wrong. And it's just like, even outside of what you want to compare it to, geez, it's a heavy-handed show when it comes to their political messaging, for a show where they claim that they're not having any political messaging. and just, it's like Finrod and his weird story or allegory, analogy, whatever you want to call that thing he says to Galadriel. Like, what the hell kind of messaging is this? I mean, even just as a generic fantasy show, it's convoluted, it's strange, its pacing's weird. And why do they hate the hobbits? Yes, they're hobbits, get over it. Why do they hate the hobbits, and why they portray them as like these terrible, weird homeless people, and they're dirty, and at one moment they're like, oh, they say self-congratulate themselves by saying they are, of all the people of Middle Earth, they have hearts bigger than their own feet, and it never gets, don't get me wrong, with so much wrong with that line. But then, like, the very next episode, we find out that, oh, they leave people for dead if you fall behind, and, like, it's weird-ass shit. What is this? Even as a generic fantasy show, it's just strange. I might, if I wasn't offended by how much they're, desecrating Tolkien with this, I might watch it as just a curiosity, but it's a hard show to get into. Outside of, all the paid media platforms telling me I'm supposed to like it, I'm not sure why I would like this on any level. And And see, that's when you back up and you look at it all together. Okay, so they spend a ton of money, buy the rights to one of the most famous fantasy IPs in existence. They twist and distort the lore all over the place with no respect whatsoever, all while pretending they do. I mean, just the strange gaslighting from the showrunners about how much they love Tolkien, and we go back to the book, which is just obviously false to anyone who actually knows the contents of the books. And so they can totally disregard the lore, which, why do that if you spent so much money to get the lore? The value of the Tolkien's, the financial value of buying that IP was because there's lots of people who love this stuff. So why do you do that and then disown yourself from the thing that gives it value in the first place? What are they doing? So you see all the strange propaganda, attacking Tolkien, attacking the fans, destroying the lore. Why do they spend money on this? And then they come up with something that's so objectively poorly written. Even from just daytime television standards, did no one proofread this guy's work? Did no one look over this and say, maybe this isn't the best way to get into even general audiences? It's a convoluted mess, and we have to either believe that they spent $1 billion project on something that had no oversight, that was clumsily handled, or is this all on purpose? Or is just trashing Tolkien as legacy just a goal here? Using it as a tool to generate political strife and, public debates, accusing more people of racism, just all part of the goal. I grew up in a world without racism. I'm sorry, say what you want, but I grew up in a world where pop culture is filled with people of every race, every creed, every sex and gender, and whatever else you want to call it. I mean, people did not... The idea of discrimination or bigotry of any kind was just like, we all know that's bullshit. We don't care about that. We all just want to have fun. And it wasn't until about 2015 when suddenly, this narrative getting pushed everywhere that everyone is racist and we have to fix the world. And it's around that same time we see what's going on to pop culture. That in 2015, Star Wars released, Star Wars Force Awakens, and we were all excited. We were excited. Oh, great, cool, Star Wars sequels. And then it quickly became evident that those movies were not being made by people who loved Star Wars. They're being made by people who had an agenda. And I'm not even talking about some sort of racial gender stuff. I'm talking about just like a political agenda. All your heroes, all the people you loved from Star Wars were being rewritten and killed and just diminished. And it was not just about Star Wars. It happened in every publicly popular IP everywhere. And just the rights were being bought out, either bought out by someone with a lot of money, or the company was infiltrated by people with political agendas, and then all of a sudden, all pop culture, all the stories and the legends and all the entire fantasy genre is being taken over and rewritten to where the people, not with new ideas, not with new great ideas, but all your favorite characters from previously are now being rewritten and diminished and ruined and twisted, and male characters are all bad, and female characters are either just reduced or changed in warped ways, and no one knows. It's like, what's going on here? Why is there no new content, and why is all the old content being rewritten in a very visible pattern? So by the time it gets to Lord of the Rings here, I'm sorry, I don't believe a word of it. I don't believe any of this is being produced with goodwill. I don't believe anything they're doing in Rings of Power is because they love Tolkien, or because they love Lord of the Rings, or even because they love fantasy. Everything, you take all the evidence together and look what you see. This is not a passion project, someone who wants to create a great story. This is at best warped fan fiction by people who don't know what the hell they're doing, but far more likely it's some sort of heavy-handed social engineering project by people who feel that their social agendas are more important than any fantasy, possibly because they themselves have no sense of imagination and can't grasp anything beyond, its political effect. And that's being nice. Because if I want to take it deeper, then this whole thing's insidious. It's just twisted. People who want to destroy things they don't like. So, without going farther on that, let's just say that no, I have no obligation to like Rings of Power. I have no obligation to give it a fair chance. I have no obligation to watch it or encourage anyone else to watch it. In fact, I discourage anyone from watching it. I discourage anyone from participating in it. It's like, no, don't be seduced by flashy graphics and, oh, look, but they say names from the books, and there's swords on the screen and a fight scene. Ooh, you can find better quality work almost anywhere. I cannot be seduced. I cannot be bought. I'm not. I can find better fantasy content. Okay, I'm not so starving for good fantasy that I got to participate in something that was made with apparent malice and just disregard for Tolkien. This is look, the best part about the Jackson films, even though they broke the lore here and there, and they had differences, and there are things to complain about. If you're a true by the books purist, the Jackson films weren't perfect, but they were made with love. They had made with this obvious desire to make the best work they could, to respect Tolkien as much as they could, and we're always gonna have creative differences about how things should be adapted, but there was this love to it that you could just feel, and I knew that there was people, friends and so many more out there who would never read the books, who were just never, it wasn't gonna happen. They weren't gonna get around to reading the books, but because of those movies, they were going to be able to experience the spirit and kind of the soul of what Lord of the Rings is about. I could tell them, hey, now that you've seen the movies, maybe you would want to read the books, or maybe at least they know what I'm talking about, or at least they know, I could share that experience with people who would otherwise never read the books. And that same thing is the exact worst part of Rings of Power. That same thing is why I feel an obligation. I can't just ignore Rings of Power. I can't just move on and mind my own business, because if Amazon has their way, their crap, their corporate pet project here will be what the new generation sees when they see Lord of the Rings. There's people who may not get around to watching the Jackson films, but they're going to see this Rings of Power first, and they're going to think, oh, this is what Tolkien is? Oh, this is what it's about? And they're going to see the scrambled lore, these twisted messaging, and just, this stuff that does not live up to him at all. And of course, the way they hide behind, racism and sexism to say that if you criticize their work, you're racist, and so they can cloud the legacy of Tolkien even more by saying, oh, anyone who doesn't like this version is like, what are these? The thought that there's people, this is what they want. They want a whole new generation to grow up seeing only their stuff. They want to hijack Tolkien's legacy so that future generations will only see their versions of the work. They're envious of the massive cultural effect that Tolkien has had, and they want it for themselves and are trying to buy their way into it. Because they're not going to stop with this second age sort of quasi-prequel story. No. Later they're going to move on, and they're going to do their own version of The Hobbit, their own version of The Lord of the Rings, and it's going to be even more twisted than what we see now. And if they have their way, they will just take the momentum of Tolkien's cultural influence, and they're going to just wedge themselves in there and say, now we own it, now we control it. They don't want to do any of the work of earning our love. They don't want to do any of the work of actually creating their own unique content that people fall in love with. They just want to use their money and their political influence to just take over the culture. And again, using these lame-ass excuses about racism and stuff as if they're making the world a better place. But they're not making anything. They're not making anything better because they're not making anything. All they do is take what other people have done and then destroy it. So for as long as Rings of Power exists in any relevant form, it will be my moral obligation to stand my ground and remind people of the difference of what Tolkien actually wrote and this crap that Amazon produced. And you can like Amazon's Rings of Power if you want. I'm not going to tell you shouldn't. If it's you just like watching whatever they cranked out, I think it's fairly objectively bad. But what you can't do is you can't tell me that has anything to do with Tolkien. They fill their show with references, so try to make it mean something. But references are not respect. And the reason why we like Tolkien's lore is not because of just random references, because of what it all meant. And what Rings of Power means is something totally different. And I'm not going to stand for it. One of the primary purposes of this channel, for as long as I'm able to make videos, will be to remind people of what Tolkien's works really are. All the qualities they really have, and what's really in them. And when necessary, point out how Rings of Power and their content is not that. Something totally different. And so I'll be having plenty more videos ranting about Rings of Power, but I'd hope to stop that soon. It will no longer be necessary, and I'll just make this channel about Tolkien. about Middle Earth and why I like it. And the fantasy genre as a whole, and why fantasy is relevant and meaningful. And it's not just, sure, it is entertainment sometimes, it is escapism sometimes, and those things have value that is often ignored. But even beyond that, there's just a quality to the use of imagination and storytelling that should not be ignored. And that's what this channel is about. And if you like anything I've said here or anything I'm doing, please like, share, and subscribe. I'm new to this whole YouTube thing, but I'll be getting better, get better at recording and better at putting the videos together, and I hope to make this a much more, entertaining project that hopefully people can enjoy. So if you're on board with that, let me know and tell me what you think of Tolkien and the Rings of Power in the comments below. I'll see you next time. Bye.